once again to the only you, Dr. Patino in his office and me in mine. And today we're going to chat a little bit about how to deal with a tyrant or a bully or anybody who causes you an inordinate amount of contempl- contemplative, excuse me, I can't word to it, contemplation in a negative manner. Essentially, anybody who's truly bothering you at your core and essentially becomes a tyrant of your brain. And how do we manage that? How do we get rid of it? How do we move past that?
Welcome everybody. Here we are once again talking about life and talking about stress and talking about how to manage our life in a way that is more adaptive and less destructive for ourselves. Hence, the only you. And we have chosen this topic about tyranny and tyranny and how to deal with it because for me in particular, being somebody who has to deal with emotions from other people all the time, I always find it fascinating how much we allow people to spend time in our heads without paying rent, right? I mean, from 2015, 16 till now, there's been a constant barrage of people trying to influence our thinking in ways that make take us toward tyranny, and I was listening to the news this morning, an argument about fascism versus tyranny, and what the difference is. And the discussion got terribly academic in terms of what is really fascism and what is really tyranny, right? But the differences were mostly in terms of degree. So what I learned from the process of listening to those news was that we forget that to get to fascism, we have to start somewhere, right? And usually fascism is predated by tyranny. So
Mhm.
it's important to recognize that tyranny is a problem, right? And it's very insidious. It's something that it kind of trickles within society, and people become very convinced of what they're hearing to the point of almost giving their life for it. And that's where danger really starts, because you create a base of people who will believe anything that the leader says. And that's kind of like the definition of cultism. So there's cultism, tyranny that may lead to fascism. And we've seen that movie in the 20th century and before, and in the history of the United States for a long time.
Well, it sounds like tyranny is the actual process to get people to accept certain realities. I mean, we've heard the terms bandied around. There's tyranny of the majority, tyranny of the minority, all different things, and they affect the polity in different ways. They affect people's mentality. But on a personal level, when you have that one person in your mind, whether it's a political figure, a celebrity, whatever obsession, a friend or a family member that ends up, like you said, spending a lot of time in your mind without paying rent, what's the solution for that? What is the process of purging oneself from that internal tyranny that really we're making for ourselves?
Well, there are different ways of going about how to deal with that, right? And it really becomes a very personal way of handling communication. In other words, um, we have to really get into understanding that um, we are in control of the input, right? We control how much we allow people to get into our heads. But sometimes we bombarded by so many different opinions, right? That instead of shutting down, we pick one.
Mm.
So we once we pick one and we become embedded into the cult, it becomes extremely difficult to stop being connected. And one of the first signs that we are excessively connected is that we feel an obligation to defend, right?
Mm.
When you get into the point of having to defend an opinion of somebody else, you've lost your own, right? So, one of the ways that we can deal with the altercations, the resentments, and the conflict that evolves from this type of situations is really to talk less and listen more, right? Now, we're not trying to convince ourselves to change, but what we're trying to model is that the person that we're arguing with that has become excessively defensive and angry can learn from our attitude, right? That is not the end of the world to listen, right? And to eventually listen to a different opinion and different arguments, right? So sometimes when we're having that conversation, instead of getting ourselves cynical, critical, or trying to dumb down the people, you know, they're arguing a point that sometimes is irrational, right? Um, we have to be able to help them get to a point where they're at least are willing to listen to our opinion. Now, we probably will succeed 25% of the time. There are people that are so entrenched in the idea of having to defend the cult that there's nothing that we can do. And that's the moment that we have to be able to decide we have to move. But unfortunately, sometimes we walk away with that person inside of our head, right? And that's where we have to start practicing not blaming other people, right? That our suffering is something that we can be in control of. Our stress is something that we can have action about, right? And becomes important that we don't get into a situation of saying you're making me feel that way, right? When we start putting the blame on the other person, that the dynamic gets very dysfunctional.
You know, it's interesting. I hear that a lot. People say, "You make me feel guilty. You make me feel this," and my response is always, "I can't make you feel anything. That's on you." Why? Where did that come from? Where did that, I guess, our defense or survival mechanism in our society come from that we immediately blame another person for our internal responses?
You know, in the dynamics of psychology and personality, that's a process that we call projection. It's a lot easier to project onto you saying, you hate my ideas, than to say, I hate my ideas.
Hmm.
Because whenever they start, I mean, it's actually a reflection of them starting to question their ideas and clamping down and projecting it on you. So I deal with that a lot with kids in the hospital, because it's a very primitive type of reaction, of projecting it to somebody else. You hate me, I don't hate myself. So with kids, they usually tell me that, you're making me feel embarrassed, you make me feel afraid, you're making me feel this, and I have to tell them, you're making me too powerful,
Hmm.
right?
Interesting.
So that's kind of a neutral response, right? Because think about it, if you have the ability to control somebody else's emotions to that level, okay, then you're terribly powerful. So we have to explain to people in empathic ways, I'm not that powerful, you know? I mean, because they have the option of walking away from you, and instead of trying to convince you that their ideas are the correct ideas. So when somebody is trying to convince you of the big lie, for example, right? And they won't stop trying to convince you, you have to ask yourself, how come they're trying to convince me so aggressively?
Hmm.
Because that reflects their doubt, right? They're not talking to you, they're talking to themselves. So, in those situations, in order to get that outside of your head, you have to be mature enough to walk away from it and agree to disagree, right? I mean, that's where it becomes important.
And that seems to have been a really a lost talent, or even a lost, I mean, anything that we do in our society now. It's become that zero sum game. If you're right, I'm wrong, and it makes, and it puts me down lower. I was having a conversation with a person today. and I didn't agree with most of the things they were saying. And I was trying to put these things into practice, just empathetically listening, agreeing in certain more generalized areas without getting into the details and the weeds, and not challenging the person, and kind of allowing them just to kind of vent on their own without fighting it. Just saying, okay, I want to truly listen to your viewpoint and not be judgmental. How does somebody, and again, this is new to me. I'm not typically that guy. I can be very
But
argumentative. How do people develop that skill set?
well, it is practice. I mean, you have to practice, practice, practice. I mean, this is what I do for a living, right?
Hmm.
So you have to become somewhat non-reactive to criticism, somewhat non-reactive to rejection, somewhat non-reactive to acceptance. But you also have to be able to recognize other people's emotional state, right?
Hmm.
When you, I mean, when you are in a conversation and the other person starts getting angry, their mind is going to start getting pretty small, right? There was somebody said once that anger shrinks the brain. So if you start recognizing the anger coming out, that is the moment to walk away from that conversation because there's no logic in that process. Now, we also have to be willing to learn to recognize the openings, right? I mean, if a person is having a conversation with you and keeps talking and starts building up some anger, but it stops and says, well, let me listen to your opinion, right? That's an opening. But I mean, I've been watching a lot of the arguments in school board meetings, right, where you have all these parents, and they won't let anybody talk,
Hmm.
whether it's somebody at the podium or somebody in the back. There's all this constant yelling. It's become a tool, right? It doesn't matter that if you're saying is right or wrong. It doesn't matter what you're saying is a lie or not. It's just you have to control the dialogue. And you the best way to control your dialogue is by don't stop talking and be angry about it, right? Because what happens, and that's what we have to recognize ourselves, the situation, when you feel that you have to defend yourself, is a moment to walk away. The moment that you start defending your opinion, you've lost.
Hmm.
Like the moment they started defending their opinion, they have lost because there's no dialogue, right? Now, one of the problems with modern society, social media, overprotectiveness, fascism, and all of these issues, the big lie, January 6th, and all that, is that we have gotten to a point in which we require an immediate response from someone. I mean, very few people are willing to say, let's stop it here. Let's start the dialogue again tomorrow, right?
Hmm.
That is non existent anymore. And there used to be a time, that you would uh, go to have coffee with your friends. You're going to have a conversation. Somebody gets a little hot, and then things slow down. And then you come back the next day to the same place and have another conversation with them, right? But it was not the end of the world. And in part has to do with our need for acceptance immediately. Right? So we
Well,
have to.
and validation too, right? I mean, people want to feel good. I mean, the likes, the thumbs up, with the way our social media and communications is going, they want to hear an instant response. I mean, I have friends who I text and you won't hear them. They won't respond for days and days and days. It doesn't bother me. I'll get a text and my wife will be like, "Are you going to answer that?" I'm like, "No, it's nothing I need to do." But that's rare. I mean, people think it's me. I'm being rude because I don't respond. And my friends are, "Oh my god, I can't believe he hasn't responded for 3 days." I'm like, "Well, yeah, I'm assuming he's busy and there's more important things. It's
But you
no big
see,
deal."
remember that a minute ago we were talking about projection. That's easier to say you hate me than to say I hate myself. When you get into the situation of collective need for appreciation and validation, you're getting into a little bit of a similar problem, which is if I don't get validated and recognized, I'm not worth anything.
Mm,
So just the excessive need for validation and recognition is in direct relation to your lack of self-esteem, right? So we need to practice more recognizing that I can be alone with me and I'm worth it. I'm not worth it because somebody tells me I'm worth it. I'm worth it because I'm a good person. I have good values and I don't hurt other people, right? Those are the things that we have forgotten to tell ourselves. I mean, I sometimes I think about kids on Instagram, TikTok, those places, Facebook, YouTube, should be writing memes and little videos and reels for themselves.
Mm,
I mean, why would you like a friend to tell you and tell it yourself to yourself, right? And then you click, I love this reel, right? And instead of uh, doing it for the rest of the world to recognize you, that's very empty. We've said this before many times. The most valuable person you have is you, and you're going to have you forever.
but that
All
seems to be the currency of the day, right? Clicks, likes, and and the like. So, um, I guess part of it is knowing yourself and being able to self-diagnose. So if you are a person who needs to have that immediate gratification, that immediate response, that might be a red flag for yourself that you might have some issues with your own self-esteem. Is that correct?
Oh, absolutely. And you have to start analyzing, how did I get here? What happened with my life that I ended up so empty?
Mm,
And emptiness is something that I see every day with a lot of kids in the sense of they're not being able to validate themselves, right? I mean, this morning, I'm in a unit with 18, 19 girls ages 12 to 17, right? And it became like a competition of who was speaking the loudest, right? And then I had to say, well, what's the purpose? What are you trying to accomplish by being the loudest, right? And do you understand to what point that is a reflection of your need for attention, your need for recognition, your need for validation, that you're the best at doing the worst?
mm,
And that's what is happening a lot in society today. And we've seen it in politics. The one who's the best at doing the worst gets the most likes.
hmm. Gets the
And
most attention.
that's sad.
Very.
That is sad.
So, and really, then, the tyrant is you.
Yeah. So you see, when you interject all these ideas of tyranny and control of other people, and that power is more important than dialogue, and that power is more important than understanding, and that power is more important than agreement, and that power is more important than democracy, right?
Mm,
You are being a tyrant with yourself, because at the end of the day, the whole issue with democracy, which is never perfect, is to balance, right? So there are some people out there who don't want balance,
mm-mm.
who want
It's their way or
things
nothing.
exactly. And that, you know what is I find really fascinating? That's terribly childish.
Mm,
You know, when I sometimes people ask me, how do you deal with this? How do you deal with kids and adolescents who are behaving like 3 year olds, right? Well, the only thing I can do is to set the boundaries, okay, and to recognize that it is their problem, not mine. And sometimes I have to get sit down with people with this type of situation and think of all of them as disturbed children
mm,
in a therapy session, right? Now, I'm trying to do that. That's what I do. And some people can tolerate it, some people can and walk away. But neutrality and ability to listen and understand can take you a long way. Now, you have to be very careful when you're in situations like this, especially with people that are close to you, and in that you shouldn't get them off your heart, right? Especially
mm.
people you love.
Because there's a difference, right? Head and heart, significant difference.
Yes, and what is happening is that some people reject you as a way to keep them to keep you in their hearts, right?
Mm,
Some people will reject you because they don't want to hurt you. they want you to walk away because they recognize their potential for violence and anger. Some people don't, right? So it becomes very important that we recognize when it's time to walk away, that we're in control of that. But those who are close to us or disagree with our point of view or they have been contaminated by cultism, right? You can disagree with them, but you don't have to hate them.
Mm.
Okay, hate is a very passionate feeling and is usually a very protective feeling. Uh, Sometimes people will tell you they hate you because they want you to walk away, okay? Because they're so miserable inside of them that they're afraid of their control.
It's interesting you say that about walking away and the fear and insecurities in my side of the training world. I hear a lot of people talk about, well, if someone gets in my face and they're insulting me and this and that, I can't walk away. And I always find it interesting. I said, the most well trained people and dangerous people I know have no problem walking away because it's no there's no psychic or personal or psychological injury to them. It's almost the way it's the opposite. They're like, I'm being merciful. I'm just going to walk away from this. You calm down, and they also keep the person in their heart. If there's someone they have a relationship with, we're going to come back another time when you're calmed down, or when you're in a better state. We'll chat. It's very interesting. The more secure they are, the easier it is to walk away from these things. And even though walking away from a fight and running away from the fight looks the same, it feels significantly different inside. So at my end, it's obviously being skilled, being aware, being physically fit. How does someone on a psychological level develop those skill sets, ability, toughness to be able to walk away and feel good about themselves?
You have to understand that you have to walk away. You have to understand that you're not the problem. Okay, if you think you're part of the problem, then you're equally willing to argue the point that you're trying to defend, and that's never going to get you anywhere. The other thing is meditation. Meditation becomes a very good way of learning to be calm under the worst circumstances. Now, you also have to understand that you should never be condescending with other people, okay? Because the more condescending you are, the more you're projecting your insecurity about them not being able to understand. So neutrality becomes also important. You have to take time outs, But you see, the way you describe it was beautiful when you said, you know, some of the most dangerous people I know walk away from dangerous situations. And there's two, and it sounded to me like you were talking about a very mature, balanced parent, right? Who's sending the kid to timeout
Hmm.
and say, when you come down, we'll come back and have a conversation. Okay. A lot of parents are not able to do that nowadays. They don't know how to do that. But that is basically the empathic way to try to limit children from continuing acting out. But if the children watches the parent being out of control, it becomes a competition, right? So you have to understand that when you're trying to discipline the child is the one who needs disciplining, not you. The second thing that I found terribly interesting with this your statement was when you said, um, "We'll come back and do this at a later time." That demonstrate purpose. You see, people who are trained to kill, people who are trained to be violent, people who are trained to be in control of their emotions and not show their emotions, they always have purpose. And they very rarely deviate from purpose, right? If you are not purpose, they won't waste their time with you.
That is true. That is true.
so we should not become purpose, right? Once you open up the door for you to be the purpose of their anger and hate, you've lost. You're gonna have to walk away. It's not gonna be an option, and you're
Yeah.
not gonna walk away on your terms.
And that's really, I think, a part of that security and feeling good about it. You again, back to control. You do it on your terms. You feel confident. You feel safe, and move on from it. As you say, you do this for a living. It's easier said than done. I know over the years I've known you, I've definitely gleaned a lot of techniques from you. Um, so where does a person, just your average mom, pop, or even just person down the road, where do they start?
You start with planning. If you're gonna have a relationship with someone, you need to start talking about planning your kids and planning with some professional help or with some learning or some reading or whatever you need to do. The art of parenting, right?
Hmm.
Because it's not something that comes natural, and you're going to hear a lot of different opinions, but you have to have a business plan for your children, right? And you're going to have goals, and you're going to have ideas, and you're going to have ways of managing problems, right? You're going to have plans for managing deficits if your kids have some, right? And understanding that parenting is never about you, it's always about the kids, who are borrowed and temporary and circumstantial. So there's going to be a time when the job is going to be done and you're going to have to walk away from it.
Good advice as always. Thank you very much, Doctor. We appreciate your time and your wisdom, and we'll see everybody again next week.
Hey, thank you, Vince, and we'll see you next week.